It was a peaceful evening at St. Clair's Regional Hospital, a place where the usual hum of machines and occasional laughter of night shift nurses created an oddly comforting environment. The clock struck 10 p.m., and most patients had settled into their beds. The staff were wrapping up the day's paperwork and preparing for a quieter night. Nurse Sarah, known for her gentle nature and keen observation, was making her usual rounds. The fluorescent lights above cast a soft glow on the corridors, and the faint smell of antiseptic lingered in the air. She glanced at the patient charts, her thoughts already drifting toward her midnight coffee break. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the hospital's automatic doors, shattering the tranquility. Sarah froze for a moment, her heart skipping a beat. She and other staff members rushed toward the entrance, their footsteps echoing down the hallway. What they saw next left everyone stunned. A chimpanzee stood in the middle of the lobby, clutching a tiny human baby wrapped in a tattered blanket. Its dark, intelligent eyes scanned the room, and its posture was tense yet deliberate. The chimp's breathing was heavy, its chest rising and falling as though it had been running for miles. Panic erupted among the staff. Someone screamed, and a security guard fumbled for his walkie-talkie. "We've got an animal loose in the hospital! Everyone stand back!" he shouted. The chimpanzee, startled by the commotion, tightened its grip on the baby and let out a sharp cry. Its protective stance and urgent gaze silenced the room momentarily. Sarah, standing at the edge of the crowd, felt a pang of curiosity rather than fear. She noticed something peculiar. The chimpanzee wasn't acting aggressively. Instead, it seemed scared, desperate even, as if trying to communicate something. The baby let out a faint whimper, drawing everyone's attention. Sarah took a step forward, her instincts as a nurse overriding her fear. "Wait," she said firmly, raising a hand to stop the security guard from approaching. "Look at it. It's not here to attack. It's here for help." The room fell silent again, the tension thick enough to cut with a scalpel. The chimpanzee locked eyes with Sarah, and for a fleeting moment, she felt as though it understood her. "Call animal control," someone muttered from the back, but Sarah shook her head. "No, not yet. Let's figure out what's going on first." She took a cautious step closer, her heart pounding in her chest. The chimpanzee didn't move, but its grip on the baby remained firm. Sarah knelt slowly, making herself appear less threatening. In a soft voice, she whispered, "It's okay. You're safe now. Let us help you." The chimpanzee's eyes softened slightly, and Sarah noticed something hanging around its neck, a worn leather tag. As she inched closer, the air seemed to crackle with unspoken tension. Whatever brought this creature to the hospital, Sarah knew it was no ordinary encounter. Something deeper, something extraordinary was at play, and so began the night that would change her life and the lives of everyone in the hospital forever. The chimpanzee stood in the middle of the hospital lobby, clutching the baby tightly to its chest, its sharp, intelligent eyes darting between the people surrounding it. The tension was palpable, a mix of fear and confusion rippling through the staff and patients who had gathered at a safe distance. "Stay back!" the security guard barked, his hand hovering over the taser on his belt. The chimpanzee, sensing the aggressive stance, let out a guttural growl, making everyone step back further. It was clear that the animal would protect the baby at all costs. Nurse Sarah, still kneeling a few feet away, raised her voice, calm but firm. "Don't provoke it. Can't you see it's scared?" The hospital administrator, a nervous man in his 50s, hurried into the scene, his phone pressed to his ear. "Animal control is on the way," he announced, his voice shaking. "They'll sedate it and take it away." "No!" Sarah exclaimed, rising to her feet. "We don't have time for that. The baby could be hurt or worse. We need to act now." The administrator hesitated, glancing at the terrified crowd and the unpredictable animal. "And what do you suggest we do? It's a wild animal." Sarah ignored him and turned back to the chimpanzee. She softened her voice, speaking directly to it as if it could understand her. "I know you're scared," she said gently, "but we want to help. Can you let me see the baby?" The chimpanzee's grip on the child tightened. It stepped back a few paces, its eyes wide with fear and mistrust. The baby let out a weak cry, a sound so faint it sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. Something was wrong. The baby's cries were too feeble, its tiny body too still. Sarah's nursing instincts kicked in, and her determination hardened. She took a deep breath and moved closer, ignoring the murmurs of protest from her colleagues. As she approached, Sarah noticed something unusual about the chimpanzee. Its fur was matted, and its breathing was labored, as though it had been through a harrowing ordeal. Around its neck hung a small, worn leather tag, swaying with each breath. Sarah squinted, trying to make out the faint writing etched onto it. "What does it say?" someone whispered. Sarah finally got close enough to see the tag. The words were smudged but legible. "Help me, my baby is sick." The realization hit her like a thunderbolt. The chimpanzee wasn't just holding the baby, it had brought the child here for help. It wasn't an act of aggression, it was an act of desperation. Turning back to the crowd, Sarah held up her hand. "This chimpanzee didn't come here to hurt anyone. It's trying to save this baby." The room erupted into hushed whispers and shocked gasps. The security guard lowered his taser, though his expression remained skeptical. "Even if that's true, how do you plan to get the baby without setting it off?" Sarah glanced back at the chimpanzee, whose eyes were fixed on hers. She could see the pleading in its gaze, the unmistakable look of a creature out of options. Slowly, she reached out her hands, palms up, in a universal gesture of peace. "Let me help," she whispered. The chimpanzee hesitated, its grip faltering slightly. The baby whimpered again, its frail voice breaking the standoff. With agonizing slowness, the chimpanzee extended its arms, holding the baby out towards Sarah. The moment was electric, the room holding its collective breath as Sarah gently took the child into her arms. The baby was pale, its tiny chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. "It's burning up," Sarah exclaimed, feeling the baby's feverish skin. "We need to get it to the ER now." As the medical team sprang into action, the chimpanzee backed away, its body sagging with exhaustion. But it didn't leave. It watched from the corner of the room, its eyes never leaving the baby, as though waiting for reassurance that everything would be okay. The conflict had shifted from a standoff between man and beast to a desperate race against time to save a life. Sarah knew they had only just begun to unravel the extraordinary story behind the chimpanzee and the fragile child it had risked everything to save. The hospital's emergency room buzzed with controlled chaos as Sarah and the medical team worked swiftly to stabilize the baby. Its tiny body was feverish, pale, and alarmingly weak. The chimpanzee, despite the efforts of hospital staff to coax it outside, had refused to leave the premises. It now sat just outside the ER's glass doors, watching intently, its dark eyes filled with worry and exhaustion. Sarah's hands moved instinctively as she adjusted the baby's oxygen mask and connected it to monitors. The room was tense, the beep of the heart monitor irregular and weak. A pediatrician, Dr. Whitman, ran additional tests, his expression grave. "What's the prognosis?" Sarah asked, her voice urgent. Dr. Whitman shook his head. The baby is severely dehydrated and has a rare bacterial infection. If we hadn't intervened when we did. He didn't finish the sentence, but Sarah understood the weight of his words. She glanced out at the chimpanzee, still sitting vigil outside the glass doors. That animal saved this baby's life, she murmured. Dr. Whitman looked at her in disbelief. We don't even know where the baby came from, Sarah. This whole situation is... He trailed off as a nurse entered the room, holding the leather tag Sarah had noticed earlier. We found this on the chimp, the nurse said, handing it over. Sarah took the tag and inspected it again. This time, she noticed faint initials on the back. GW. She frowned, the gears in her mind turning. We need to check with the local wildlife sanctuary. This chimp could be one of theirs. Just then, the baby's monitor let out a shrill, irregular beep. Everyone froze. The baby's heart rate was plummeting. Code Blue! Dr. Whitman shouted. The room erupted into action as the team scrambled to save the baby. Sarah's pulse raced as she adjusted the IV drip, praying silently for the child's survival. Meanwhile, outside the ER, the chimpanzee began to pace, its agitation growing with each passing second. It let out a series of distressed cries, slapping the glass doors with its palms. Calm it down, someone shouted, but Sarah knew there was no calming the animal until the baby was safe. After what felt like an eternity, the baby's heart rate stabilized. The shrill alarm of the monitor faded, replaced by steady, rhythmic beeps. The room exhaled in unison, relief washing over the team. Sarah carefully swaddled the baby, her eyes welling with tears. She walked to the glass doors and opened them just a crack, kneeling so the chimpanzee could see the baby was alive. It's okay, she whispered, her voice trembling. The baby's going to be okay. The chimpanzee let out a low, mournful sound, sinking to the floor as though all the strength had drained from its body. Its eyes filled with tears, real, unmistakable tears, as it looked at Sarah, conveying gratitude in a way words never could. Suddenly, a loud commotion came from the hospital's main entrance. A man in khaki uniform rushed in, a name tag identifying him as George Whitaker, head of the local wildlife sanctuary. That's her, he shouted, pointing at the chimpanzee. That's Bella. She's one of ours. Sarah stood, holding the baby tightly. This chimpanzee brought the baby here to save its life. Do you know where the child came from? George hesitated, looking stricken. We've been tracking Bella for days. She escaped the sanctuary during a storm. I had no idea she... He paused, his voice faltering. There was a child trafficking ring operating near the sanctuary. We think Bella found this baby abandoned in the forest and... The weight of his words hung in the air. The chimpanzee had not only escaped, but had protected the baby and sought out help, traveling miles to find a hospital. Sarah looked at Bella with newfound respect. This animal, this so-called wild creature, had demonstrated more humanity than many people could muster. The chimpanzee slowly stood, its eyes locking with Sarah's one final time. There was a profound understanding between them, a silent acknowledgement of the extraordinary bond formed in the face of desperation. Bella had done her part, and now it was time for the humans to do theirs. As the sanctuary team moved in to gently guide Bella back home, Sarah whispered, "Thank you," knowing she would never forget the courage and love that had saved a fragile life that night. The tension in the hospital began to dissipate as the baby stabilized in the care of the medical team. Sarah stepped outside the ER, her adrenaline finally subsiding, and found herself face to face with Bella, the chimpanzee who had defied all odds to bring the baby to safety. The wildlife sanctuary staff had arrived to take Bella back, but the chimpanzee remained seated, her eyes fixed on the ER door. Her posture, once tense and desperate, had softened, though her gaze still carried a lingering trace of concern. Nurse Sarah crouched to Bella's level, speaking softly. "The baby is going to be fine. You saved a life tonight." She wasn't sure if Bella understood the words, but the chimpanzee's soulful eyes seemed to say she did. George Whitaker, the sanctuary head, approached cautiously. "Bella's story is remarkable," he said, his voice tinged with awe. "She's been with us for years, rescued from a lab that experimented on primates. But I've never seen her act like this. She must have formed a deep connection with the baby during her escape." Sarah glanced at George, her brows furrowed. "What about the trafficking ring? You mentioned the baby might have been abandoned?" George sighed heavily. "The authorities are investigating. We've reported everything we know. It's possible Bella stumbled upon the child after it was abandoned by smugglers, or maybe the traffickers fled and left the baby behind." Just then, the ER doors swung open and Dr. Whitman emerged, cradling the baby in his arms. The little one, now swaddled in a clean blanket, looked far healthier, its cheeks pink with life. The moment Bella saw the baby, she let out a soft, high-pitched sound, a mix of relief and joy. She reached out gently, her long fingers brushing the edge of the blanket. Sarah smiled, tears welling in her eyes. "It's okay, Bella. You did everything you could." The hospital administrator, who had initially been panicked about the situation, now looked on with a mixture of awe and humility. "We need to make sure this story gets out," he said. "People need to know what this animal did tonight." A few days later, the story made national headlines. Chimpanzee risks life to save human baby, a tale of bravery and maternal instinct. The hospital staff, sanctuary workers, and even law enforcement couldn't stop talking about Bella's extraordinary act. Donations poured in for both the wildlife sanctuary and the hospital, ensuring better care for both humans and animals. As for the baby, investigations revealed the child had indeed been a victim of human trafficking. The authorities located distant relatives, and after extensive vetting, the baby was placed in their loving care. Bella, meanwhile, became a local hero. The sanctuary welcomed her back with open arms, ensuring she had the care and protection she deserved. Visitors often asked to see her, and the staff would recount her incredible journey to the hospital. Sarah, who had formed an unspoken bond with Bella, visited the sanctuary whenever she could. On one such visit, she brought a small photograph of the baby, now thriving with its new family. She showed it to Bella, who studied it with those same intelligent eyes. "You did this," Sarah whispered. "You gave this baby a second chance." Bella responded with a soft, almost human-like smile, a rare expression of contentment and peace. For Sarah and everyone involved, that night at the hospital was a reminder of the profound connections that can exist between humans and animals. Bella's story wasn't just about a rescue. It was about courage, love, and the lengths a motherly heart would go to save a life. Months had passed since the night Bella, the heroic chimpanzee, walked into St. Clair's Hospital clutching the baby. Though life at the hospital returned to normal, the story of that extraordinary night had left an indelible mark on everyone involved. The baby, now thriving under the care of a loving family, had become a symbol of resilience and hope. Photographs of the child, once fragile and fighting for survival, now showed a healthy, smiling infant. The family often sent updates to Sarah, who felt a deep, personal connection to the little life Bella had saved. At the wildlife sanctuary, Bella had become somewhat of a legend. Visitors flocked to see her, and donations surged, allowing the sanctuary to expand its rescue efforts. Bella, once a victim of cruelty, now lived a life of comfort and care. Yet despite the accolades and attention, Bella often retreated to a quiet corner of her enclosure, gazing at the horizon as if still thinking about the baby she had saved. One sunny afternoon, Sarah decided to visit Bella. She brought a small gift, a framed photograph of the baby sitting with its adoptive parents, all smiles and love radiating from the image. Sarah felt a lump in her throat as she approached Bella's enclosure. Bella recognized her immediately. She ambled over to the glass barrier, her eyes lighting up with recognition. Sarah held up the photograph, and Bella's gaze softened. She reached out, her long fingers touching the glass as if trying to hold the image. "You changed everything," Sarah whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You reminded us of what it means to care, to fight for someone who can't fight for themselves." The sanctuary staff, watching from a distance, were silent. The moment was profound, a connection that transcended species, language, and understanding. Later that evening, Sarah wrote a heartfelt article for the hospital's website titled "The Night Bella Taught Us Humanity." She recounted the chimpanzee's courage, her maternal instincts, and the baby's miraculous survival. The story went viral, sparking conversations around the world. It led to increased awareness about both animal intelligence and human trafficking. Nonprofits reached out to collaborate with the sanctuary and the hospital, creating joint initiatives to protect vulnerable lives, both human and animal. The legacy of that night grew beyond anyone's expectations. Schools taught Bella's story as a lesson in compassion, resilience, and the interconnectedness of all living beings. Hospitals implemented new training programs to better respond to unconventional emergencies. The wildlife sanctuary became a hub for education, with Bella as its shining star. As Sarah reflected on the experience, she realized that Bella's actions were more than a heroic tale. They were a wake-up call. If an animal could demonstrate such profound empathy and determination, what excuse did humans have to ignore the suffering around them? The story closed a chapter, but opened many more. Bella became a symbol of hope and an enduring reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary acts of humanity come from the most unexpected places. And for Sarah, every time she looked at the photo of Bella touching the glass, she felt a renewed sense of purpose, a promise to carry forward the lessons of that unforgettable night, a promise to make her own impact, just as Bella had made hers.